Hello? Okay, we're going to start. Oh, that worked. Just have to find where I put it. Okay, is this it? All right, we did it. Okay, we found 4. All right. Oh, it's not even being shared. Come on, guys. Let me know about these things. Alrighty, so welcome to week 4. Real quick before we get started, I should just wait for more people, whatever, I'll just repeat it. Yeah, I'll just repeat it at the end. So, you remember how next week is the festival? Remember how we were like, oh, we're going to do 30 minutes Mshad. None of you guys are going to show up for 30 minutes, I already know. By the time I gather you leave, Mshad, it's not going to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to do an asynchronous class, meaning that it will be recorded and it will be on you to watch it. All right, so we're not going to have in-person. You guys could just go straight to the festival and help out. In the future, as part of your course for pre-servants, you will have to help with the festival, okay? So it's kind of like, like an internship. Like when you go to college, you might have a class where it's like a chemistry class where you learn about chemistry, and then you have a lab where you try it out. Same idea. You're going to have a class where you're learning about pre-servants material, and then you're going to have an opportunity to serve, okay? And then, as we know, when we're done with all of the courses, we place you in classes already, okay? So this is going to be kind of like, instead of just throwing you into a class, we're going to get you into some service a little bit. And the festival is supposed to be every 2 months, every 2 to 3 months, depending on what holidays we have, or if we have Siyam, for example, we're not probably going to have it. But point is, it'll be continuous throughout the year. So you guys will have many opportunities to serve. And then for those days, we just won't have Sunday school or pre-servants prep. But for just this next week, we're going to have it asynchronously. Okay? Yes, it's 2 days. It's 2 days, but it happens every 2 months. No, they switched it to 2 days. Okay. Yeah. It was supposed to be 1 day, but they're switching it to 2. 30th, and I think it's a Saturday and the Sunday. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. We can ask Tanjiji, but based off what she was telling me, she was saying maybe 2 days. Shveka. But you guys will only have to serve on the Sunday. Yeah. If you want to serve extra on Saturday, that's fine, if that's something, but I know a lot of people's schedules might not allow for that, so we'll do that. Tim, can you shut the doors in the back? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Oh, full house today. All right. You guys ready for this? This is going to be wild. No. Okay. All right, so some of you guys were not here last week. Last week we talked about philosophy. Remember, we talked about the absurdity of living without God. We essentially said if we accept the idea that there's no God, then we also have to accept the idea that there's no true good or evil. What's the point of life without an end, right? We're doing the bullseye thing. Does that sound familiar to people that were here? Okay. So we basically discussed how philosophically it makes sense to have a God, because otherwise we would be in this huge pot of existentialism and depression. So we were talking about how if you choose to believe that there's no God, you might be content, but you might never be happy. Wait, that was weird. You might not ever be happy. Okay, I don't know what's happening. You might not achieve like eternal happiness because there's always this thought in the back of your mind that, there's no eternity after this. We're done after this. And so that doesn't bring any joy. So that was last week. So this week we're moving on to level 2. Is it?
So what level of apologetics that we were discussing, finishing up last week with what you just mentioned? 1, right? So we're still that. So what was the question in level 1? Anybody remember? We get to do this every time because it's the central piece. What's that? How do we justify our belief that God exists, right? So, also I want to keep in mind, right? We don't have to find evidence for God to exist for him to be existing, right? God exists. This is a belief, right? First believe, then try to understand, right? But so it's not a question of whether we know God exists or not. This is, again, remember we were saying that's a personal experience, right? You have to decide and hear, does God exist, right? And so we know from our Bible, and we know from what's happened in the gospel, and we know from our own personal lives that God exists. But how do we justify our belief that God exists except for that? How do you justify it to somebody else, right? Okay, so and then we used 3 different subjects to discuss that. What were those subjects? The first one, science, right? How about the second one? We discussed history. And the third one we discussed last week? Philosophy. Very good. So now we're going to talk about level 2.
Sorry, guys. I forgot to do this part, but OCD tendencies. Okay, boom. All right. So what we're going to look at now is level 3, or the apostolic versus non-apostolic Christianity. I don't know why I said it that way, but here we are. As well as, is it the God of Christians or another God? So we're going to do level 2. This is how the breakdown is going to be. We're going to start out by defending our faith, and then we're going to look at a different faith, okay, and compare. All right. So this is what Tim was just going over. We already went through level 1. Right now we're on level 2, Christianity. So do you want to tell them about this one?
Yeah. So as we promised, every week is going to have, and so last week this was supposed to be what we wanted to share, but I wanted to match up with what we're talking about. So as you know, in level 2, so what's the question in level 2? As we start to get into it, what's the question? We just looked over it just a second ago. She showed it to you. What's the question here? So now we've come to the point. So remember, step 1, okay, fine, I agree, God exists. وبعدين, how do you know it's not the God of the Muslims? How do you know it's not the God of Judaism? Is that the same God as the God that you believe in? How do you know it's not the polytheistic group of gods that the Hindus believe in? How do you know it's not a general spirituality as in Buddhism? Or how do you know it's not the earth like in Native American religion, right? How do you know it's not these things? Why is it that why is it Christianity, the religion that dictates the relationship with another God, a spiritual, higher being, or spirituality, right? Why? So how do you justify that belief? So this is level 2. That's the question level 2. So this is Abuna Anthony Murad, who, again, is one of the servants for the Orthodox Answers, brother? Yeah. Coptic, I just have it on my Coptic Orthodox Answers.org. So this is our website for apologetics within the Coptic Orthodox faith. And so Abuna Anthony Murad is one of he serves for this Orthodox Answers. And he answers this question. And so I love the videos on there. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it before. If you haven't, please, QR code. But it's very energetic, very lively, and it's short. Like, I think this one is like 10 minutes or something. So, so basically, I think it's one way to answer this question, right? Because I think maybe we don't all think this way, but this is a legitimate question. Like, don't just so I want you to consider that as we're looking to this, because what the purpose of level 2 is, and Vicky's going to get into it. Dr. Vicky, I think I'll let what the purpose of level 2 is not to know what everyone else believes and compare that to us. That's comparative theology, it's a different field. It's more how do you get to the answer that we all got with Christianity being the answer, not necessarily everything else. But because that's part of that bigger question, I think that this is a good piece to look at, and then we'll get in and kind of take a little slightly different route to get to a similar answer.
All right, so how did Christianity grow despite the odds? So if you think about how Christianity started, we all know that it started pretty, don't really know, does it? Pretty small, and then there's a lot of persecution, right? We've all seen the Saints movies when we were growing up, we have St. Justina, we know that there was a lot of persecution. So how did we grow despite the fact that it was just centuries and centuries of trying to, stamp us out? So Christianity, when you look at it, the first strange thing about it is the message that it preaches. Christianity preaches a message that God became man out of his love for man, was crucified, arose from the dead, and ascended back to heaven. It's a very humble message, right? When you think of pagan gods, okay? Anyone know about Egyptian mythology or Greek mythology, all that stuff? A lot of the gods were they were human-like, but a lot of them had this whole if you disrespect me, I'm going to turn you into grain or whatever, stuff like that. So this idea is very brand new for the time that it emerged in, right? This idea that there is a God that is humble enough to take the form of man and to endure a type of punishment that was for the lowest of the low criminals, and then to rise up from the dead and ascend back to heaven. So this whole message was just strange. St. Paul even calls it foolish. He says it in Corinthians, for the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. So if you believe in this message, right, if we are taking this message and we're yes, we believe in it, it's power to us. But to everyone on the outside who, maybe let's say they had never heard of Christianity before and this is the first thing someone tells them, they're going to be that's weird. Why? That doesn't make sense. Why would you guys follow that? And Christians behave differently. Their view on life and its purpose is that it's temporary. We view on loving everyone, including our enemies, which was also not very heard of. Remember, it was eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, way back when. All the contempt of the worldly possessions. So a lot of times in the olden days, when people would convert to Christianity, they would donate their stuff. They would give up their titles, and they would just live a very humble life. And their contempt of death, right? They don't care about death. Death is not even a factor. I don't care about my life. I will give my life for Christ, whatever. And that was very weird for a lot of the historians that were watching. The other thing was the way the message spread. So Christianity was not easily preached. There was a lot of opponents at its time. So yeah, you could kind of preach it at, kind of maybe loudly at the beginning, but over time, the message was sort of, a lot of opponents came out. The Jewish people came out and were hey, this is blasphemy, this is an attack on us, etc., etc. The Romans came out and they were you are disrespecting our pagan gods. Absolutely not. So the way that it was preached was not very easily. And there were also, Christianity wasn't the only thing that popped up around the time. Other inventions, other religions were being invented at the same time and didn't prosper, such as one by Theodos, who's mentioned in Acts. But Christianity's principle is to spread the message. This is the other weird thing, right? Openly. So I will give you an open message. Without the use of power. So the initial Christianity, I'm going to say initial because later historically we got a little bit sidetracked, but initially we said no, if you don't believe, that's okay. I'm going to go my merry way. And that's kind of the same principle that we use now, right? For our own preaching. We can tell someone about Orthodox Christianity. If they don't accept it, we're not gonna sue them. There's no like religious autocracy that's like you have to accept it or else, like in other countries. Like we don't use power at all. Without deceit, we don't trick anyone. If you have questions, ask. We're not like, it's not like incentives, right? Like, oh, join our church and get $3,000 a month. And then, like we're pulling in people monetarily, or we're not trying to trick anyone. The message is open. The message is out there. If you want to have questions and ask them, go for it. That's fine. And then without punishment for non-believers. That's very important. That goes hand in hand without use of power, right? So if you think of other regions of the world where religion is the ruling power, sometimes there's punishment, such as, okay, you can't move up in rank because you're so-and-so. You can't become this specific type of, you can't go into medicine or whatever because you believe in so-and-so. And we're going to protect our society by only giving power to those that believe in the same things we do. So that's all kind of not in our doctrine at all. We don't believe in that. If there were things that happened in the past historically, we don't really support that. So I'm thinking of like the Crusades. That was something that it's not us, right? It was like a different type of, it was Catholics, but still that idea that, we have an army and we're going to go and we're going to forcefully convert people, that is not part of the original spread of Christianity at all. That's not something that we ever did at the beginning. And it worked. So it started with 82 disciples and apostles combined. Remember, 70 apostles, 12 disciples, are all gathered together, tongues of fire, boom. Remember this? Okay. Plus a few believers, right? The few believers that Christ had gathered throughout his preaching, when he was alive. There were some people, but no one was unified, right? They went and they heard Christ and they were like, oh, it's like, I think it's God, guys. Like, and that was it for a while until we sort of pulled it together into a religion. So was it hard for these leaders to be contained or killed by the Jews and Romans? Not really. It wasn't really that difficult. But they were still able to continue despite not having a sword to defend themselves. So none of the apostles carried like a bow and arrow or a sword or like whatever. They didn't defend themselves in any way. If they were arrested, they were arrested. If they were killed, they were killed. It is what it is, We have eternal life, so whatever. All of them were martyred, by the way. We'll get to that. And some of them lost status. So St. Paul was very high up in the... he was like a very well-educated Jewish... What was it? We said Pharisee, right? Yeah. We had to look into the history of St. Paul a bit. It was a little bit convoluted, but... Point is, he was very high up, very well educated, very pro-Jewish at the beginning before he, remember, lost his sight and had a vision of Christ, all of that. So despite all of his education and his status, he did not care. And he was like, this is the correct way. I will give all of it up because I know it is correct and I'm going to preach it to you. So all 82 were martyred except for one. Who is the one? Who is the one that was not martyred? Think. I know you guys have it in you. I'll give you a hint. He wrote a book. Yes. Yes. John the Beloved. Yes. He wrote Revelations, right? That's the most popular one that we know, on the island of Patmos, where he was exiled. The rest, though, all 81, were killed in very strange ways. Like, not strange, just different. So not all of them got beheaded. Like, some of them were, does anyone know how St. Peter died? Crucified upside down, right? There's some who had, like, their flesh skinned off, and it's pretty dark, okay? 81 of them out of the 82. That's almost 100%. And yet, here we are. So that in itself doesn't make sense. So they were martyred publicly. So it wasn't like this was a secret behind doors. And we have historians that hold the account of the killing of St. James, for example. This same historian also held the account of the beheading of John the Baptist. So we know he didn't just pop out of nowhere. He had accounts previously that lined up historically. And Christians welcome martyrdom. So every time someone was martyred, they weren't like, oh no, I'm so upset, no, let me run away. No, they were like there, and they were singing hymns and praises, and that baffled everyone around them. They were like, what's going on? So it's throughout history, even now, right? Like what happens when, for example, a church in Alexandria gets bombed? Yes, we get upset. Yes, we tell the government, hey, but we go back to church anyway, right? Next week, service resumes as usual. As long as the church is standing, I'm there. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. The other odd, so we did not start off we didn't have any riches, right? We didn't, there wasn't a king one day that was like, all right, so I saw a thing and this is our religion now. And we have ample, riches and resources to spread it. That's not what happened. We preach love and peace and we don't fight back. We're tortured. And the God we are preaching does not save us from death, right? Not always, I will say. Because there were many saints, right, that were put in situations that could have easily killed them. But God kind of, he would heal them until they were beheaded. Usually beheading is the final stage. So, but people are always like, oh, if your God's real, like, he'll save you, right? Kind of similar to the thief on the cross, one of the thieves on the cross, where he was like, oh, if you're really God, save yourself. And even Christ was like, I'm not going to save myself. That's not the point, right? The point is not to save your physical human life. It's to, gain your eternal one. So what gives? We have to remember that no one's going to die for something they're not sure about. Like if you're kind of iffy and you're like, are you really going to jump into the abyss? Unless there was other stuff going on, right, that, is unrelated. But like, no person, it's against kind of like your will to live to just jump in, right, without being absolutely sure of what you're doing. So there are other faiths where people kill themselves, right, for whatever they believe in, but that's the key. They believe that they will achieve whatever end goal is there. That's a firm belief. So Christians also died for the truth, but we did not hate those that were killing us. So maybe in those other religions, there's like very negatively charged language against the people they're trying to affect. But for us, we're like, okay, if you're going to kill us, you're going to kill us. Please stop, if you can. But if you can't, that's all right. We still love you anyway. That's fine. It's cool. It's chill. And we're model citizens, right? Like no one is, we're composed of many different types of people. Follow the rules, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that's key with Christianity. It's compatible with society. Christ was never like, all right, anarchy, okay? Anarchy's the way. Never said that. He said quite the opposite. So we were not persecuted for social disruption, if you think about it. We didn't cause issues in the Roman government, and then the Romans were like, we got to get rid of these people. They're like ruining society and civilization. That wasn't the problem. So we didn't offer any economic, social, legal threat to any society. Maybe you can argue social, that we're changing the mindset of the time, but at the end of the day, not really. So, for example, with war, we preach peace, but if we're called to defend our country, we go. For secular leaders, right, in Romans it says, let every soul be subject unto higher powers. For there is no power but of God, the powers that be are ordained by God. So if you think of when Christ was being crucified and he was talking to Pontius Pilate, he was very respectful. He didn't go, I'm God, what do you think you're doing? Like, get these off. Like, he didn't do any of that, right? He gave respect to the person in power. He reminded him, like, you only get the power from God, but still, he gave respect, and that's what we're called to do. We're not called to go against leaders that maybe don't share our same beliefs and go, God wins. That's not the point. If there are rules in the land, you follow the rules of the land. Give what's Caesar's unto Caesar and what's God's unto God's, right? Like this. Give to all their dues. To the one due tax, the tax. To the one tribute, the tribute. The one fear, fear. And the one honor, honor. So by fear, obviously, it's not like change what you're doing. Like, you're not afraid of anyone, but like, you're only afraid for your eternal soul. But the idea of like reverence, responsibility, feeling like you have to do something for someone who is, in charge, that's okay. We're encouraged to do that. And family, this one's interesting. So if one spouse believes and the other doesn't, the believing spouse does not have to leave the marriage. We do not have to stay away from non-believers. In the past, in other religions, you would stay away from those that were sinners, right? It's unclean. We do not have that, even that idea within a marriage. So if your husband, or like if Tim one day was like, I'm out. After teaching the whole apologetics course, he's like, actually, no, reverse, bye. I don't have to leave. I could still stay in the marriage and be like, no, like, habibi, why, you know? I can still do that. And I'm not going to be unclean in the eyes of God. If anything, I'm blessed in the eyes of God because I'm staying and persevering. And it's vice versa too. Like if I was like, bye, and Tim was like, no, habibti, come back, he would still be blessed, right? This is reflective of how, this is like a very key thing I want you guys to think about, how we act now. How do we treat people that are sinners or unclean? Do we judge them and stay away from them and not talk to them? Or do we engage and love and answer questions? That's really important because we have a tendency to judge those that maybe don't agree with everything that we have, and we tend to isolate, and we tend to think that we're better, and that's not okay. So even within the confines of a marriage, where you would think logically God would be like, well, he doesn't believe, and marriage is supposed to be this journey to heaven. Even God at that point was like, no, you can stay and you can persevere. So we have to think about how that translates to other aspects of our lives. So we even talk about slavery. Now I want to be clear, it's not that the Bible supported slavery, but at the time, it was woven into the fabric of society. And once again, the Bible is not going to tell you anarchy, like throw off everything and like let's go. No, it's gonna try to guide through things that might be difficult, like slavery. So it says, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of your heart as unto Christ. So basically bring your Christian mentality into your service. And at this time, there was slavery, but there was also, what's that other type, guys? Thank you. Yes, indentured servitude. And that was very popular, right? You sell a few years of your life for whatever gain, right? And so going into that, Christ was still like, or the Bible is still like, go into it with a Christian mentality. Then we have the Roman persecution. So this spanned over 300 years. 300 years of persecution, 10 emperors. Name some famous ones. Come on, I know you guys watch all the saint movies like I did when we were kids. Come on, give me one. What?
Name some stereotypes.
Yeah.
She just mentioned one, like, give unto, okay, penny.
Begins with a D.
We know him.
Yeah, Diocletian. Very, very popular. Very popular, Mr. Diocletian.
Set Rome on fire.
Sounds like a fish, but not quite.
Sounds very similar to
A very famous fish.
for fire. I've heard it.
No, it's not.
We are
Yeah, Finding Nero. Yeah, Buddha just said it. Oh, good job. Yeah, Helen. Nero, yeah. So that was just a few of the 10, right? So all of these things happened publicly. They did not happen behind closed doors. No one was stealing Christians at night and then killing them, and all the Christians suddenly disappeared over time. Like, this was public services. It was done in the Colosseum, for example, like hundreds of people. And yet Christianity was still not extinguished. So we didn't have any visible support, right? Christ wasn't back. Well, he came and then he left again, right? But he wasn't like, hey, people, stop killing my people, right? He was like gone. He was ascended. So we didn't have any visible support besides the 81 that were killed. So it's not really much support there. We didn't have an army, except for the Crusades, but that wasn't once again, historical blip. We didn't have a status, so there was no, there was no way for us to have any weight in conversations. So this was an eyewitness who was watching the persecutions and said, even the wild beasts, not without rhetorical exaggeration, refused to attack the Christians, as if they had assumed the part of the men in the place of the heathen Romans. The bloody sword became dull and shattered, executioners grew weary, had to relieve each other, and the Christians sang hymns of praise and thanksgiving, even to their last breath. So what he's saying is, so many people were killed. So many. The executioners literally took shifts killing people because they were tired. And yet, they still were there. They still sang hymns and praises, and they grew. They grew.
So did you mention this was the time of Diocletian?
Oh, this was Diocletian? Yeah.
This
I just know it's an eyewitness. Yeah.
was like a historian by trade, kind of. And I just love this because this is like, it just signifies, like this, again, he's not a Christian. He just watched this happen by Diocletian, right? And he's saying, I love where it says, the bloody swords became dull and shattered. Like they killed so many people that their swords
Broke. Yeah, they broke.
Okay? And like he's not being flowerful with language. This is like he's being historically accurate. So he says, not without rhetorical exaggeration. He even says that thing, right? At last refused to attack the Christians as if they had assumed the part of men in place of the heathen Romans. Does that make sense to you? As if they had assumed the part of men in place of the heathen Romans. What does that mean?
What does it mean?
What does that mean? That basically, that the wild beasts had given up on killing Christians as if they had become man. And like how they just decided, okay, this is like wild beasts, they're wild beasts, right? They don't care what they're doing or who they're killing or what, right? But it's as if they had become like
Watching.
The ones with the judgment instead of the Romans. Like the Romans lost judgment, but the beasts gained judgment is what he's saying. Anyway, I just love this paragraph because it signifies like what Christians went through during that time.
So Justin the martyr, though beheaded and crucified and thrown to wild beasts and chains and fire and all kinds of torture, we do not give up on our confession. But the more things that happened, the larger the numbers that became faithful. That is a trend for Christianity. The more persecution, the more, things are happening against the people, the more the people grow. Why? We don't know. Or do we? And Philip Schaff. Who is this guy?
Philip Schaff is I think Protestant historian and theologian who said this.
Okay, so he's basically summarizing it for you, okay? He's saying no other religion could have stood for so long a period, the combined opposition of Jewish bigotry, Greek philosophy, and Roman policy and power. So if you think of those three major things, what do you guys know about the Roman Empire? What do you know about the Roman Empire? The sun never sets on what? Or is that England? Also same thing though, right? The early England, we would say. It was pretty big. It was pretty big. They had a big army, and they conquered everybody. Rome was a power. Like when we're thinking of power, it was like, think of like the United States, right? With all of their power, right? So Rome was massive. What do you know about Greek philosophy and thought?
What about it?
What do you know about it?
There was a lot.
Greek philosophy and thought is the source of a lot of things. It's the source of a lot of philosophy now, how we understand it. It's the source of, I would say, psychology. I would even say that Greek philosophy probably ignited a little bit of the way we think in medicine. Like, it is the source of a lot of thought. So the Roman Empire, with all its power, Greek philosophy, with all its knowledge, and the hold of the Jewish people could not extinguish this religion. That's a lot of big powers fighting against something that was started by, Christ and 82 people. Who all died. And Christ ascended. So, not a lot to work with, and yet here we are. And once again, no armies, no status, no power. That's how it started. So this is kind of when it started to end. After Diocletian dies, I believe Galerius was his assistant, co-emperor dude. But anyway, after he passes away, Galerius puts up the Edict of Cyritica, which ends the persecution of Christians. Things weren't great, but they were better, okay? Things didn't really get to the best of their abilities until the Edict of Milan, where Emperor Constantine made Christianity the major religion. Was that the Edict of Milan? Yeah, right? Yeah. And then the Edict of Thessalonica, Christianity is the official religion. Oh, that's what I was thinking of. It's the official religion of the Roman Empire. So Emperor Constantine was the first one to be like, hey, I was saved because in battle there was a cross and it saved me and Christians, and we're going to worship now. It's going to be okay. So Christians could openly worship. And then in 380, that's when it became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So you have thousands of years of pagan worship gone with this edict, okay? Not gone, but different.
There's such a short a time. This is a human lifespan, even in that time, right?
Yeah, I would remember.
69 years, or what is it?
Well, if you made it that far, yeah.
Yeah, but what my point is like, this is a lifetime of somebody who lived in Rome, right? Within someone's lifetime, Christians went from massive persecution at the hands of Diocletian. And then at the end of, not even at the end of that century, it becomes the religion of the entire empire.
Which is practically the world.
Empire.
Yeah.
Which is like,
well, a good chunk of the world.
What happened? Imagine in your lifetime you see that the official religion of Egypt is Christianity. That's crazy, right? That's insane.
It's what, 10% of people right now? To 90%? Probably more 15, underground, but still.
That the government has taken up this new religion, right? Okay, so I just want, that there's power in that, if you can see the time span.
Yeah. So insurmountable odds, right? In conclusion of this section, the message itself, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and the ascension, the way the message was spread without sword or force, the fact that there was only 82 people that were preaching it to begin with, and that all 82 were persecuted, and at the end 81 were killed, one was banished, and that the severe persecution lasted for more than 300 years, egged on by several different factors. Perhaps, maybe, there's a God that supports it. Possibly. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? So that really highlights that verse. Okay, we're going to switch gears. So before we start this section, I don't want to go into it. We're not going to be making fun of anyone. We're not going to, say things that are not very polite. We just want to compare, right? So compare in your head what you know about what we've learned and what we've discussed, and more importantly, how we followed apologetics, right? So how we talked about science, how we talked about philosophy, how we talked about history. So I want you to keep that in mind when we talk about Mormonism. So that's going to be my little disclaimer. And me before you guys, okay? I'm going to put the same disclaimer for myself. So now we want to look at something that's completely different, okay? Who are they? What do you guys know about them? Yeah. They did not, actually. Mm-hmm. We didn't know that until we looked into it, yeah. But they are currently in Salt Lake City. That is correct. That is their current place, yes. Are you thinking of the Amish? Oh, Jehovah's? Amish mostly are in isolated groups away from society, but what else do you know? Yeah. 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 Well done, well done. Yes. Joseph Smith, that's this guy, all right? So it was founded in 1830. Church of Latter-day Saints is one of the largest groups in the United States and is currently headquartered in Utah. It is very large. It's larger than you think. It's not just, like, the stereotype is that, okay, there's only Mormons in Utah. That's not true. They're everywhere. And it's pretty massive as a religion. So the short of the long is that Joseph Smith claimed an angel named Moroni appeared to him, selected him to translate the Book of Mormon, a book which contained information about the ancient people who inhabited the Americas. So basically what happened is there's this angel that showed up to Joseph Smith and was like, hey, the Bible translation that you guys have now has been tampered with. Here is the actual thing that happened. And translate it. And so Joseph Smith was like, okay, I guess I'll translate it. Mind you, he was the only one who was able to see these things and translate them. We'll talk about that. Did you know also that he was a politician running for president and was killed by a mob in 1844 that was anti-Mormon? I just thought that was interesting. He's the first official presidential candidate to be assassinated, actually, which is, I don't know. We just thought that if you showed up on a game show one day, that might show up. So we just thought we'd tell you guys. I don't know. Yeah. So Brigham Young is actually who leads the Mormons to Utah and away from Missouri, is it? Or somewhere in the East Coast, yeah. All right, so these are their distinctive beliefs. They believe that the gospel was revealed to Adam in the garden. They believe that the Garden of Eden was located in Missouri, USA, and that Christ will establish Zion in Jackson County, Missouri, when he comes back. Christ is Jehovah of the Old Testament. The Father is Elohim. We'll talk about this, but the Trinity is distinct. The Trinity is not one. It is three. It's like semi-polytheistic, but their beliefs in general, it's not the same. They believe that to worship, you worship God here on this earth. But there are other gods. We'll talk about that. And they believe that they are the direct descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, literally. Okay? So we're in America, but we are still the direct descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just keep it in your head. And Christ came to America after his resurrection to preach and ordain apostles. So basically, after he resurrected, he showed up here, and he preached here, and he ordained apostles here, and that's where the Book of Mormon comes from, right? What actually happened in the Americas. They believe in three distinct heavens, and they believe the family unit can continue forever. And humans have potential to become gods. The family unit, like husband, wife, children. You stay together. Yeah. Yeah. Humans have the potential to become gods. Okay? So, this is from I had to go on their website because there's a lot of stereotypes about them, and I wanted to make sure to get as accurate information as possible. And I don't even think I did, but this is what's from their website. But they believe in a God that is God, the eternal Father, his Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost, are three distinct personages, not one singular being. We call them the Godhead. Okay? So all three have one purpose for earth. They work together for that one purpose. But you know how we believe God is three in one? Like the sun, its rays, the light, all one thing? They don't believe that. They believe like sun and moon and other planet. Like that's how distinct it is. But it all works in one solar system. Okay? So that's the idea. So these are their 4 standard works that they go by. They actually do look at the Bible, right? But that section that's pre-America, we'll call it. Then they have the Book of Mormon, which is the section that is post-America, okay? Where you have the Nephis and the Lamanites. Yeah, all right. And then they have the pearl of great price, which is kind of like an accompaniment, like how we have the thoughts of the fathers and maybe actually probably closer to the apostolic letters. They have the pearl of great price, as well as the Doctrine and Covenants, which was also written by Joseph Smith. Okay, so these are the 4 standard works that they go by. So we're going to look at some flaws or ideas in translation. Like, remember when we looked at the Shroud of Turin, how many people looked at the Shroud of Turin and how many scientific, examinations, computer 3D, like if we were to take this shroud, the blood patterns, all of that, a lot of science into it. This is a bit different. No one was allowed to examine the plates up close. The plates are carried around in a box. The plates were not consulted in the translation process, so only one person did it, and that was Joseph Smith. That's it. If you think of the nature of the Bible in general, is the Bible written by one person? It's written by many over years, and it comes together in this beautifully bound, Bible. But for the Book of Mormon, one guy, one dude. And he would often have a cloth between him and his scribe. So even the scribe couldn't see what he was doing. There was like a curtain between them. And he would translate and the scribe would write it down. And the plates were conveniently taken away by the angel once the translation was complete. So there are plates and then there's the covenant stuff. The actual original plates that he translated were taken away after he translated them, according to him. Yes. What a great question. Egyptian. No, like hieroglyphics. Supposedly. Supposedly. Mm-hmm. You're asking the right questions. Good job on the questions.
He's from the U.S.
Yes.
And he translated.
Yes. According to him.
He was given power from God to
Yes.
translate the plates that only he could see.
Okay. Okay.
The angel Moore and I brought them to him.
Remember? And then Moore and I took him back.
So this angel brought him these plates that have ancient Egyptian text on them, and he would spend time translating them. So somebody would write down what he's saying, but there would be a veil, and he would translate out loud to the person who's on the other side of the veil, and that person would write down what he's saying. But no one else was allowed to see them, and they were kept covered all the time. And then once he was done with the translation, they were gone.
Poof.
So does this angel accept it?
Angel Moroni.
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 Like maroon, but with an I. Moroni. So now you're starting to think critically. All right. So let's talk about the divisions of the kingdoms that they believe in, right? There is the pre-mortal existence, or how we all existed before we came to our earthly bodies. God the Father is the literal father of all of our souls, and we existed with him in this pre-mortal existence. There was basically like a council, I would call it, between Christ and the devil and the other gods, and they were like, what do we do with these souls? And the devil had an idea, and Christ had another idea. And obviously Christ won, right? And the devil was, his idea was shunned. And so we were sent to earth in order to be tested so that we can go back to being with our God the Father. Don't ask me detailed questions about that because I'm not sure unless you want me to write them down and ask later. The purpose right now is to be tested and refined to return back to God the Father. But what's our purpose in our religion? Eternal life, right? Yes, also to be reunited with God because sin, but essentially it's to live eternally with God, who is our Father. Just 1 second. Yeah, sure. Sure. Mm-hmm.
It's what, remember we talked about purpose. Remember we talked about this chair right here and the purpose of this chair. What is our purpose? what do we believe about love? What's that?
Oh, no, it's answer.
Our goal, we have a goal, but what's our purpose? Why did we have to exist? Why do we have to exist? Because God so loved you. Before you existed, he loved you. He so loved you, he wanted you to experience his love. What is God? God is love. And then from our human mindset, because, and I want you to be very clear on this, from our human mindset, how does one experience love? It is a relationship, right? It has to be one component and another component, right? At the end of love is the object of the love, right? So that's in our human minds, that's the way we understand it. Does this mean that we needed to exist for God to exist? For God to be loved, did we need to exist? No. But he so loved you before you existed that you were made so that you can experience love. Okay? And so ultimately, that's our purpose. It's not to be tested for our faith. Right? That's not, God did not make us so that we could be tested for our faith.
It's also a little bit hard to use this comparison because the nature of God is different for them than it is for us. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to try to speed through it. There's 3 different types of kingdoms: the celestial kingdom, the terrestrial kingdom, and the telestial kingdom. So they believe as man is now, God once was. As God now is, man may be. What does that mean? That means that God was once human, became God-like, nirvana, right? That was a good comparison. And became the God that we know. So for us, God existed before everything is everything. For them, no, God had a source and became a man and then eventually God, okay? So the source was, the comparison is now different, right? When we're talking about purpose, to being with an eternal Father that loves us very much and has a type of like the way that he's composed is different. He's perfect, he's holy, he's eternal. It is different than this God who was once man, who became God-like and then became a God. And with this idea, that means that possibly their God could fall. There could be imperfection in their God because their God was once human. So now we're looking at something that's a completely different idea, right? So I already told you the story of how we started. The celestial kingdom is the highest of the 3 kingdoms. This is where really, really good people are. Best thing. Yeah, I'm going to try to finish it real quick. Yeah. The terrestrial kingdom is where good people go, but they weren't the best. The telestial kingdom is people who did not receive the gospel of Christ or the testimony of Jesus. They go here. They're okay people, but they just didn't get the gospel. And then there's another part of the earth that is really, that's like the concept of hell. So the main beliefs is that God is, as we talked about, God is 3, not 1. He exists in a universe that he did not make. Okay? The universe existed before all of this. It was not created, and God did not make that universe. And humanity exists to progress. So that idea of Eve in the garden and wanting to be like God, that was an upward fall, not a downward fall, because Eve wanted to progress in her humanity. It's that same idea that we talked about with Nietzsche, right? That idea of let me let go of religion in order to progress to my highest human self. And the role of evil is to oppose, and it's always going to exist in the universe. It's not like this enemy, it's just an opposition. It's choosing good over evil that's necessary to human progression. We should be forming family units in life, and we should only gain knowledge through this religion because everything else has been tampered with. The resurrection provides proof, Christ's resurrection provides proof that we too will rise again. So these are the main issues, right? Besides the ones that we pointed out. It does not explain why anything exists or continues to exist. It cannot account for the philosophical and scientific evidence which we have already accounted for in our own studies. It's difficult to see objective moral values. If God is not perfect and was human, then where does the morality come from? Where does this idea of good and evil come from? If evil is just opposition and God is not perfect. And God can possibly go wrong. That's it. Any questions? I know we rushed through that last part, but yeah. They believe that's one of the flaws, right? We cannot use any science, like science doesn't matter. Science doesn't work. The Big Bang, all that, no.